Amber Heard could have won this trial. So how did Johnny Depp end up with an $8.35 million judgment? Let's roll it back and do a post-mortem. Amber Heard won in 2020, even though she wasn't a party to the case in the UK. There, Johnny Depp sued the British newspaper The Sun, and a judge found that it was substantially true that Depp abused Heard on 12 out of a possible 14 occasions. That was an important case because the standard to prove defamation is lower in the UK. And the reason why is the burden is on the defendant, in that case The Sun, to prove that the statements were substantially true. Here in the United States, of course, the burden is on the plaintiff. And because Johnny Depp was a public figure, the burden was even higher when he filed his lawsuit against Amber Heard. He had to prove defamation by clear and convincing evidence. That's a higher standard than you typically have in a civil case, which is preponderance of the evidence or slightly more likely than not. Because he was a public figure, Depp had to prove actual malice. So he had to get inside Amber's head and prove that she knew the statements were false or that she acted with reckless disregard for the truth. So for those reasons, because of the loss in the UK and the more favorable law here in the United States, Amber Heard was in the lead before the trial started. Now, Depp did score one win in getting the trial in Virginia. There were 3 possible venues where this case could have been heard. In Los Angeles, where I live, and where Johnny Depp and Amber Heard live. The law here is more favorable to defendants in defamation cases because this is a liberal, First Amendment friendly jurisdiction. There's a statute here that's called an anti-slap statute, where it allows a California judge to dismiss a defamation case if he or she finds that the plaintiff has not met his burden compared to the First Amendment protections that the defendant has. So long story short, if the case was in California and if Heard had gotten the right judge, this case may not have even made it to a jury. The other possible venue was New York, where the ACLU is headquartered. The ACLU, of course, helped ghostwrite this op-ed for Amber Heard. That's also a liberal jurisdiction, somewhat First Amendment friendly. Northern Virginia is not conservative by any stretch, but it's a purple state, so of all the 3 options, it was the best for Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp won this case because he was an outstanding witness. He had more and better witnesses on his side, and because of some great lawyering. But this case was also lost because of some unforced errors by Amber Heard and her legal team. Let's start with Amber. She lied on the witness stand about facts that had nothing to do with the alleged abuse. The most important of which were the $7 million in alleged charitable contributions. So if you recall, in 2016, Depp and Heard divorced, and as part of that divorce, the parties entered into a settlement. That settlement agreement had a few provisions: a mutual release, so the parties waived any claims against one another. That's why you didn't hear anything about defamatory statements before 2016, and the focus was just the 2018 Washington Post op-ed. The release also included a non-disparagement provision, where the parties wouldn't say anything bad about one another. And importantly, it included a $7 million payment from Depp to Heard, even though the two were only married for approximately 15 months. Amber repeatedly told the public here and in the UK and during the trial that she donated the $7 million to charity. Turns out that wasn't true. She donated just a fraction of that money to the ACLU and the Children's Hospital here in Los Angeles. But she kept telling the jurors that when she said she donated the money, she actually meant she pledged the money. And that was something that was both not credible and turned off the jurors. The second big lie that was not related to the abuse was Amber Heard leaking the video to TMZ in 2016. She obviously took the video on her phone, only Heard and Depp were present. Somehow it made its way to the paparazzi. So either Heard did it, or someone working for her or who had access to her phone. But Heard kept saying on the stand that she didn't give the video to TMZ. The other important TMZ fact is when Heard filed for a restraining order, and she was leaving the courthouse. TMZ videographers and paparazzi were there. They were tipped off. So again, it was obvious that either Heard, her publicist, her attorney, her assistant, someone from her team had notified the paparazzi. Heard's doubling down on those lies caused her to lose credibility and for the jurors to disregard her testimony entirely. When it came to the alleged abuse, Heard exaggerated, which again caused her to appear to be less than truthful. When she described the abuse on the stand, she said that I thought Johnny was going to kill me. Johnny struck me so many times I lost count. But when we saw the pictures and videos of the abuse, they didn't show an attempted murder or a felony assault. What we saw, even if you believe that the pictures were genuine and not photoshopped or they weren't makeup, what we saw was a misdemeanor battery. Again, her description of the abuse didn't support the pictures and videos that the jurors saw. Amber Heard's lawyers made a number of strategic and legal mistakes. First, they wasted too much time. At the beginning of the case, the judge gave both sides a strict limit of time, a little more than 60 hours. When Depp finished his case in chief, because Heard's lawyers had wasted so much time and proceeded so slowly during the cross-examination, they had actually used more time than Depp, even though Depp started first. So they were playing catch up throughout the trial. So towards the end, they couldn't put on witnesses that they should have put on or perhaps wanted to put on, and they had to move much more quickly than they otherwise would have because they wasted time and during the most important part of the case, before closing arguments and the jurors began their deliberations. On social media and on YouTube, we saw how poorly Heard's lawyer, Elaine Bredehoff, was when it came to the evidentiary objections, especially the Tuesday of the second to last week before trial. During Amber Heard's redirect, Elaine was unable to overcome even basic objections by Camille Vasquez, like foundation, leading, beyond the scope, calls for expert opinion. Elaine had been practicing for almost 40 years, but she was unable to formulate her questions in a way to overcome these objections, so they looked bad in front of the jurors. Heard's lawyers should have called more live witnesses. The only witnesses who were of importance who testified live were Whitney, who's Amber Heard's sister, and some paid experts like Dr. Hughes and Dr. Spiegel. They're paid to be there. If you want to win a case, you have to have witnesses show up at trial. Video deposition in lieu of live testimony just isn't persuasive for the jurors. No one wants to be in court anyway, much less watching witnesses testify on the screen. Amber needed to make sure her supporters, her witnesses, her friends, anyone that was gonna really back her side of the story was physically present in court. From a big picture perspective, this was always a case about sexual violence, physical abuse. Heard's lawyers spent too much time talking about drugs and alcohol, psychological abuse, verbal abuse. First, there was no question that Depp has a substance abuse problem, that he's an alcoholic. This is something he admitted when he testified. His friends more or less said the same thing. The recordings did depict the parties yelling at each other, being cruel to one another. And again, that was supported by the other witness testimony. But Heard's statements, the alleged defamatory ones, talked about sexual violence, domestic abuse. She needed evidence of physical violence, and much too much of her time was spent on these other not related matters. On top of it all, Johnny Depp was an amazing witness on the stand. He was much more likable and credible than Amber Heard. He admitted to his substance abuse problem. He even owned the damaging text messages that were sent to Paul Bettany, where he said he wanted to have intercourse with his ex-wife's corpse. He had an explanation for even bad facts. Now, this is something that Amber Heard just didn't do. She ran away from everything. Johnny Depp not only owned his drug and alcohol abuse, he talked about his own abuse that he suffered at the hands of his mother, who was very vulnerable in talking about something that must have been very painful. And he discussed it in a very public way. He talked about how his mother's abuse caused him to start using at the age of 11 and how difficult this whole ordeal was for him. Johnny Depp, being such a good witness, caused everyone on social media who maybe was on the fence and didn't necessarily support him to turn to him. And by the end of his testimony, probably 80 to 90% of the folks watching on social media, including YouTube, were Team Depp. He was so much better than Amber Heard. Amber needed a very good performance to win, and she just didn't deliver. During closing arguments, Depp's lawyers Ben Chu and Camille Vasquez went after Amber hard, focusing on the lies, the exaggerations, and the inconsistencies. Importantly, though, they didn't ask for any amount of damages at all. This case was never about money for Johnny Depp. It was about him clearing his name, restoring his reputation, getting his acting career back. And that's what he said on the stand. So even though Depp's lawyers didn't ask for any specific sum of money, the jurors rewarded him and they punished Amber Heard to the tune of $15 million. $10 million in compensatory damages to make Depp whole for the harm he had suffered. So those are the economic damages, past and future. So losing Pirate 6, for instance, any future harm that he suffered because he can't get acting gigs, and also the emotional distress he had to endure for dealing with these allegations for 6 years, even though we're talking about 2016. Really, the damage time period was from 2018, the time of the op-ed, to 2022, when the jury returned their verdict. But it wasn't just compensatory damages. The jurors punished Amber Heard for lying, and they awarded Depp $5 million in punitive damages, as we call it. Now, what the jurors didn't know, and what we lawyers knew, is under Virginia law, punitive damages, they're capped at $350,000. So the judge reduced that $5 million award, and Depp's judgment was $10.35 million. In somewhat of a surprise, Heard actually won on one of her counterclaims, and specifically, she proved that Adam Waldman, Depp's former divorce lawyer, defamed her when he issued a statement in response to a 2016 incident where LAPD were called to the couple's apartment. Specifically, Waldman said that it was a hoax and a setup when LAPD came out. I think the reason Heard won on this claim, even though she lost overwhelmingly in the case, is because Amber herself didn't call 911. And when the police arrived, she didn't cooperate with them. So I think that's why the jurors awarded damages against Waldman. But importantly, the jurors didn't award any punitive damages, just $2 million in compensatory damages. Now, because Waldman was Depp's lawyer and acting as his agent under the law, and there's principal-agent relationships that result in what we call vicarious liability, or the Latin term is respondeat superior. But that's a fancy way of saying the principal is liable for the acts of his agent. So even though Waldman issued a defamatory statement, Depp is on the hook for it. So that $2 million offsets, and that's why we're left with a total judgment for Johnny Depp against Amber Heard for $8.35 million. Amber Heard's lawyers have said they'll appeal, and she has to, because Heard can't file bankruptcy. Intentional acts like defamation with malice aren't dischargeable in bankruptcy. And Heard's not going to negotiate with Depp's lawyers for a reduction in payment in exchange for a waiver of appeal. And since her back is against the wall and she's disliked by much of America, she has to successfully appeal to try to restore her name and act again. So what are the possible bases for appeal? We won't know until Heard's lawyers file their appellate papers, but we have some clues based on their public statement. The first category of potential error that might be a basis for appeal is evidence that was excluded from the trial. Elaine Bredehoff has talked about 3 categories. Text messages, primarily with Depp's assistant, that didn't come into evidence. Some of Amber's medical records dating back to 2012, the judge excluded. But most importantly, and we saw this argued in the middle of trial outside the presence of the jury, Heard's lawyers desperately tried to get the UK judgment into evidence. They said that the jurors had a right to know from a liability perspective, but also that Depp's damages stopped accruing after that judgment in 2020. Depp's lawyers, of course, said that was a different case in a different country with different laws, and that Amber wasn't even a party to that case. It was against the Sun. So it had no relevance, no precedential effect, and it shouldn't come in. Heard's lawyers also argued that social media improperly influenced the jurors. Now, of course, this was the most watched trial of my legal career and probably the biggest since the People versus OJ. Everyone was watching it on YouTube and every other social media channel. And what Heard's lawyers argued is, especially during that 1.5-week period where court was dark, it was impossible for jurors not to pick up their phone and go on social media. And of course, on social media, whether it was memes, whether it was videos poking fun at Amber Heard, folks were overwhelmingly anti-Heard and pro-Depp. And they argue, Heard's lawyers, that improperly influenced the jurors. Now, we just got a verdict, and the 7 jurors may start talking to the press. And if they do, and if they admit to going on social media, and especially if they say that they talked to the other jurors about what they saw, that may be a basis for overturning the verdict. So what does this mean for accusers and the accused going forward? I think it's a game changer. We've seen defamation laws used more and more, starting with former President Donald Trump, who would file against his political adversaries. Now we may see rich and powerful men follow the same roadmap, because oftentimes men are differently situated than the women who are accusing them. The men who are accused may be politicians, CEOs, athletes, entertainers. They have money that often the female accusers do not. And if they can file against these women, sometimes the best defense is a good offense, especially if you're falsely accused. It costs money to file a civil lawsuit, but it also costs money to defend it. It's not a criminal case where an attorney will be appointed for you. So if these men of means have hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars to drown the female accusers in litigation, that may change the analysis when women are deciding whether to come forward. And let's not forget, domestic violence, sexual assault, those are 2 of the most underreported crimes in this country. Although, of course, they can be falsely reported. So I expect to see men who are accused follow the same roadmap as Johnny Depp did, because, of course, he went from being canceled and someone who wasn't able to be hired by any Hollywood studio to someone who staged the biggest legal and public relations comeback of my lifetime. Thanks for watching. For more legal analysis, make sure to subscribe and click the bell to get notifications.